So there is a new bill that was recently released last week, and the really big breaking news is that this bill was approved inside of the House last week, it was approved inside of the Senate, and now, as of the date that I'm making this video, it has now officially been approved on President Joe Biden's desk, meaning that the approval process is now officially completed. This bill is relatively breaking news because there's a lot of different policies that are going to be changing inside for our country. Notice how I did not necessarily say this is great news because there are some policies that you might agree with. There are some policies maybe you don't necessarily agree with. However, I do think it's actually relatively great news in one way. One policy that it's actually relatively great news is that it's going to help save the debt ceiling crisis and situation. And I think that's something that universally, regardless of your political party, your background, or anything like that, almost every single person wants to at least be able to save that because this is what's going to help to keep the government and all of the financial side to our country continuing and running. So in today's video, what I really want to do is just to talk a little bit about the background information about what's been going on in our country. If you have already seen another video about this, I'll maybe insert some personal thoughts so you still can get something relatively original out of this video. So with that being said, let's get this video started, but real fast. As always, you guys know the same exact drill, but feel free to leave a comment, subscribe, and hit the bell if you guys are interested in videos like this, or you can watch to the end to decide, but it is always greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's get this video started. So the background story to what's been going on is that last Wednesday, if you were watching this on the release of this video, this bill was approved inside of the House, and then it was moved on to the Senate the following day on Thursday, where it was approved inside of the Senate at a vote of 63 to 36. So basically, it was approved pretty confidently, which is the really great news about it. Again, I say great news because it means that the debt ceiling is approved and it's going to be able to continue running the country. Again, regardless of the policies, which we're going to get to in a little bit, whether or not you guys do or do not agree. But then afterwards, it was moved onto President Joe Biden's desk, where it was approved on Saturday, June 3rd of 2023, saving it from the original deadline that they had believed when the policies or when the debt ceiling had to be approved in order to be saved of June 5th. In other words, the deadline was June 5th, 2023, Monday, June 5th, and now it was approved on Saturday, June 5th, which means that it is now officially saved. And the even really great news is that not only was it saved, but it was specifically saved for 2 whole years, all the way until January 1st of 2025. So that is the really big breaking news. The other big thing why this is also relatively great news, and we're going to talk about some of the policies in a little bit, but it's that it's because this was approved for 2 whole years, it does also mean that it's going to give President Biden a little bit of a peace of mind, because this is going to be one less issue that he's going to have to worry about, at least throughout this particular term, maybe into the second term if he wins presidency again, but at least for this particular term, it's going to give him a little bit of a peace of mind, because now that's one issue that he does not have to deal with anymore for the rest of his time inside of the White House, at least for the first term, at least. Now, in terms of what is the next step going forward from here is that now what they really have to do is just to focus on implementing a lot of these policies. Now, the really big great news is that there's also a lot of policies that don't have to necessarily change, but it's because they're not changing. That's why it is relatively great news. So, for example, a lot of the social programs such as like Medicare, Medicaid, health benefits, all those kinds of benefits, Social Security, they're now able to continue on running as usual. So this is relatively great news because while it means that it's not necessarily going to change, it's because it's not necessarily going to change because they originally wanted to change or even get rid of a lot of these programs or to reduce these programs. The great news is now they're going to be able to continue running, and because there's no changes, it also means that it's going to make it a lot easier on a lot of us to be able to continue, at least a lot of us that are on the programs, to be able to continue receiving paychecks and payments. If this bill was not approved, it was very probable that a lot of these programs could have seen a pause of payments of some kind or a reduction of payments of some kind. All of this stuff was a possibility if they were not able to approve it. Now that they did approve it, all of these programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government programs, they're now able to continue running as usual because they actually have the physical funding to be able to do so. And I think that's something that's relatively great news also, on top of the debt ceiling situation for basically all of us, for most people at least inside of this country, if you support these programs. Right? I think most people do, because at the end of the day, these are programs meant to involve money that goes inside of our pockets, and I think that's what most of us really care about at the end of the day. Now, in terms of what other policies are now inside of this particular bill, this article highlights several of the policy changes that are going to be happening, and we're going to explain it in even greater detail beyond what's written in this article. So hopefully, again, there's still some personal touch inside to take out of this video, but it's going to be changing the spending cap, which is currently, well, for 2024 at least, it's going to have a spending cap of $886 billion for the military and $704 billion for non-military expenses. And then in 2025, it's going to be raising the military cap spending from $886 billion to $895 billion, and then the non-military cap from $704 billion to $711 billion. So this is actually relatively big, interesting news, because the Democrats originally wanted to raise this cap quite significant. And this is something that's not really mentioned in the article, but Democrats wanted to raise the cap spending quite significantly, while the Republicans were actually looking to decrease it. Now it's going to be increased, but just by a much smaller amount. So in a way, this is kind of like the middle ground between what the Democrats wanted and the Republicans wanted, which I think is relatively pretty great news, at least in the logic that it means that they were able to work out their differences and actually now approve these programs, making it so a relative population of people from both sides are at least relatively happy. And again, I say relative because everyone has a different opinion at the end of the day, but at least for most people, I think it's going to satisfy. And at the end of the day, they voted yes on it, so it does actually physically satisfy out of that logic. Otherwise, it would not have been approved to begin with. Minus, of course, the urgency, because they had to save the debt ceiling. But in terms of Republican policies that were approved, it's going to take away some of the unspent COVID money. It's going to restart student loan payments. So there was a freeze on student loan payments for a period of time. Under this new bill, it's going to actually have to sadly continue now. It's going to add work requirements for those up to 55 years old. Currently, at this current time, before the bill was approved, there were work requirements for people trying to get programs up to 50 years old. Now they're going to be raising it to 55 years old. So if you are not between the age of 50 to 55, then it doesn't really impact you too much. But if you are in that age, then there's going to be a couple changes, but it's not going to be anything particularly drastic. But I figured it's still important to know. Now, in terms of Democratic policies that are going to be changing or just staying the same, because again, there are some policies we do not want to necessarily change. Medicaid, Social Security, and Medicare are going to be programs that are meant, or not meant, but they're going to be programs that are now going to be untouched and continue as usual. Additionally, there's going to be a lot of new policies, such as like preserving climate change and clean energy. These are programs that are going to be new and going to be implemented that I think the Democrats are going to be really, really happy with. Of course, this is again another policy that maybe the Republicans won't be as happy with, but there's a population of people that will be happy with. So overall, I think the really, really big idea is that there are some programs that the Republicans really believe in and that they're able to now get. There are some policies that the Democrats really believe in that they're also now able to get as well. And then there are some policies that kind of can swing both ways depending on how you look at it, such as like the spending cap, how it was kind of increased, but just by a little bit. So they were able to kind of approve it on the middle ground. But at the end of the day, I think the overall really big news is the fact that most people approved it, or they were really in support of it inside of Congress. It is relatively great news because it means that they were able to get what they wanted. And again, keep in mind, and I've said this before, is that the most of all is that it saved the debt ceiling crisis from happening, because there was a lot of fear originally that they were not going to be able to save the debt crisis, and that could have been a bigger problem, because that is now something that could have taken down almost everyone in our country, at least certainly everyone that has some relative background knowledge about what's going on inside of our country. They could have been impacted as well from things such as like programs pausing, lack of money, government freezes, ways that they're going to be, shut down, all of those policies. These are just things that can potentially happen. But going forward from here, what we really just have to see is we just have to see what actually goes on, or specifically how they implement these policies, and then what actually comes about as an aftermath of implementing these policies, and what actually ends up being the conclusion to everything going on right now. So with that being said, hopefully this paints a relatively big picture about what's going on in our country right now. If you guys found that relatively insightful, as always, if you guys watched to the end, thank you guys so much. Feel free to leave a comment, questions, suggestions, opinions about honestly anything. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.